Now let's have a look at the timeline. You can activate the timeline with the green button with the white arrow in the bottom right corner of your screen. Click on the arrow and the timeline interface spreads up. For those of you familiar with the Adobe After Effects software, you should feel quite at ease with the timeline interface. Let's go now into the details of the timeline interface. First of all, the top line, on which you find from left to right the timeline options, the playback button, then the display selector in order to isolate a layer, displaying, and the log pad. In pale blue green, the playback head, which indicates time in minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. This playback head moves along the timeline when you press playback. Click on the options button of the timeline and a pop-in appears, giving access to a certain amount of setting options for the timeline. First, you have the autoplay, which makes the timeline start playing automatically from the moment where an action point was created. More later on how to create action points. A loop option launches a loop of the animation from time 0 until the last action point on the timeline. The scroll timeline button stops the timeline automation and lets the viewer control the animations on the timeline with scroll actions on the mouse or with the computer trackpad. Timeline speed is controlled with the ruler on the right. If you make any change, do not forget to click Valid. When there are elements on the scene, you will notice that they also appear on the timeline with the same position they have in the Layers tab in the left menu. The first of these layers in the timeline is slightly different though. Its name, Timeline Action, indicates that all action points on this line have control over the timeline. The two tiny arrows surrounding the diamond allow to hop from one action point to another, if there are several action points, of course. Please note that even if it's not visible, there is an action point at time 0. Move the playback head a few seconds forward, then click on the diamond. A pop-in opens up, giving you access to different actions, which are Pause Timeline, which pauses the timeline, Redirect to, which allows you to switch to another page of the project or an external page. You have to enter the URL. Seek to, which makes the playback head jump straight to a time of your choice. And finally, the Trigger Click On, which simulates a click on another element. If this element has click actions, they will be triggered, of course. This virtual click-triggered action is also available in the Actions panel, which I talked about in a previous video. Do not forget to validate any change you made by clicking on the Apply button. Now let's see the other layers. Actions available are the same on any layer. Move the playback head on the time equals 1 second and bring an element on the scene, an image or a rectangle for instance. You will notice that between 0 and 1 second you have now a gray area. This indicates that during this 1 second time frame, the object placed on the scene cannot be seen. Now move your playback head to time equals 2 seconds. Select a new element and move it around. You can see that an action point was just appeared on the line at time equals 2 seconds. This means that parameters have been changed for this object and that the timeline has registered those changes. If you want to see those changes, click on the downward arrow, which you can find near the layer's name in the timeline. A submenu unfolds and 4 types of subparameters appear: position, size, opacity, and rotation. Each of these parameters can be modified separately. To do so, you have 3 options: moving the elements straight on the scene, with the Element Properties panel, or, last option, with the placement and size coordinates placed on the bottom right corner of your screen. If you wish to move an action point, it is quite simple. Select the action point by clicking on it and move your mouse left or right while maintaining the click. To delete it, just press Delete or Backspace. The very last line on the timeline contains the zooming bar as well as the scrolling bar, which helps you navigate the timeline faster.